Morning, Charlotte.
Morning, Nina.
I have to apologise for my croaky voice again. I've been partying with the elderly at the weekend. And as we all know, well, some more than others, that the elderly really can party and they just don't want to stop and they wore me out. I have a Monday morning come down with my energy levels and my voice. Yes, I was danced into the floor on Saturday night.
Danced to death.
Danced to death. Well, so it wasn't really the elderly. That was the 60th birthday. People more or less my age. But, my God, I recovered much better when I was going to a 30th and 40th birthday party. How are you? How's your week been?
Good. I've been a little bit partying, but I've been in bed not too late. That's my time.
Yeah, well, that's the key to it all, isn't it?
Early nights.
Early nights. You don't have to listen to me today. We're going to listen to someone else, aren't we?
Yeah, we have pre-recorded a really lovely interview with up-and-coming sculptor and stone carver called Tom Waugh. You know Tom from a previous encounter at City and Guilds.
Yeah, when I was artist in residence there, excuse me for not being able to recall the date, it was some time ago. Tom was finishing his 3-year diploma, which the diploma is the pre-course. It was the established course before the BA, and he was in his last year of that 3-year course doing some exciting stuff, and we talk a little bit about that. And he's gone on since the course into an interesting career into, I would say, fine art, but he also is a very well established stonemason and restoration carver. But we primarily talk about his career at the moment in fine art practice, don't we, which is really, really interesting and somebody to watch. And he was so generous with his time and his information, and it was lovely to catch up and to see what he was doing.
So if you don't know his work, I'll put his website in the show notes so you can click on and look at some of his images while you're listening to us talk about his work. So here is that interview.
Okay, we're really blessed this week. We've got an amazing, I want to say, contemporary sculptor, Tom Waugh, with us this morning. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Hi, Nina.
We've known each other since about 2007, I think we just spoke about, didn't we, when you were at City and Guilds?
Exactly, yeah. And you were artist in residence.
Yeah.
I
don't know, for like
a year there.
Yeah.
2007, I think it would have been. Yeah.
It's quite.
Was that before you taught there?
Oh God, yeah. What was I doing? I was a stonemason on the House of Parliament, I think, at the time. And then I got offered a 1-year position there as artist in residence part-time, which kind of changed my whole outlook on life, actually. City and Guilds often does that, actually.
I know. Well,
takes you and flips you on your head.
Yeah, transformative, really. And having gone from not, done a tiny bit of carving and then straight into lots of life modeling and life drawing, figure modeling, and architectural carving. It's such a brilliant environment, wasn't it?
Yeah, it sort of opens your eyes to possibilities, doesn't it? So, Tom, I think we're just going to run through, first of all, who you are in a sense, where you're based, and when did all this stone stuff started to happen for you?
Yeah. So, I'm based in West Somerset and got a workshop studio. I've always called where I work a workshop, and then since getting more into fine art, it's become a studio. But I still feel like I still feel as much like a mason and a carver as I am an
It's
artist.
so funny you say that.
Yeah.
Because when my stepfather, David Baker, moved into our house and had a workshop in the garden, David always called it a workshop, and my mum always called it.
It's funny, isn't it? It's hard to kind of get out of it and start calling the place you work something different. So I kind of stick with studio every now and then. I stick with workshop every now and then. I kind of try and call it studio, but it feels like my workshop. So, and I suppose how I started really was in Bristol around 20 years ago, and I was living near a church in Bristol that was being restored called St Paul's Church, and I'd done a tiny bit of building conservation work as a teenager for a company called Carrick. helping my dad really to start off with, who was a sadly we lost him a couple of years ago, but he was a joiner and wood carver. So I'd done a bit of work with him, working for a conservation company. And when I was living in Bristol and I was unemployed, and I'd studied music and was trying to make a go of being a musician, but I needed work, and I walked past this church that was being restored and saw that it was being run by a company that I kind of knew from a few years before, and went and asked for a job because I was looking, I could see what the stonemasons were doing, and it looked really interesting. They were working under a tarp. There was a metal container and a tarp, and they were working under a tarp with bankers made out of concrete blocks. And so I just went on, asked for a job, started off just doing conservation, not just conservation, but doing conservation, basically pointing. So and kind of managed to muscle my way into having a go at what the masons were doing, and took to it. And then I went to Bath College to study masonry through that organisation. They sponsored me to do that. And then what happened there was, there was all, I don't know, you probably came across this in your early days of masonry, Nina, but there's a sort of a bit of a resistance to anything artistic amongst some masons, and it gets called arty farty, and and it's almost like they don't want to acknowledge there's this other part to stonework, more creative side. So anyway, when I was at Bath College, there was a tutor that came in, and he did a little session that was completely not associated with the syllabus, getting everyone just to carve a very simple flower, quite a formulaic flower. And so once I saw that side of it, I was hooked on that, the more creative, more decorative side of it. And that's what led me to applying to City and Guilds to do the 3-year diploma, which is where I met Nina.
It's amazing how a single moment can be so transformative, isn't it? For somebody just to step in and to be able to open your eyes in such a simple and critical way. I think we've all probably had moments like that in our lives. I know I have.
Definitely.
It's interesting the difference it can make to a
definitely
life,
and it quite easily could have not happened, because the tutor that did that little bit of carving, was doing it quite against the wishes of the other tutors or the course leader, and also he had only come in temporarily to cover, so all these things were quite chancy, and me walking past the church at that particular time, so it's funny how these things happen, and that so that's led me to where I am now, really.
So you went to City and Guilds, you relocated to London, which is a big deal, and you committed to doing the 3-year course. And I remember you being a very ambitious person when I met you. I remember you being really experimental with types of stones, and City and Guilds is very much a limestone studio, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we use a lot of limestones there. But I remember you going, this is a metamorphic stone and it's really hard. And I remember you doing a fireplace out of something that was like glass, I just remember you being so focused, determined, and a very studious person, actually, and I just remember you being very serious then. It was really obvious to me that this was you at the beginning of your career. Or I always assumed you had a lot of stone experience beforehand, and that you were very serious. And some students aren't; they just kind of bumble around and then they go off and do their own thing. But you were focused. You knew this was your career. You were going to make money out of it. You were going to leave the studio, and you had a plan. Yeah. So is that what was going on in your head?
I think so. Yeah. And it didn't come easily. So, I had experience of masonry, but by no means, I've actually gained probably more experience in masonry. We can talk about that since leaving City and Guilds as well. But I'd done art A level, but I hadn't done any drawing. But since then, and I hadn't really ever done any modeling. So, which is such a huge part of the course. So, it didn't come easily. But I loved it. I really, and I really wanted, there were certain things I wanted to do. So there was that big frieze relief, which I was really, it was a kind of Italianate relief carving with lots of quite intricate scrolled leaf and birds sitting in the leaves and a kind of green man face in the middle. And I was really discouraged from doing that, but that probably made me want to do it more. So, I just kind of, I wanted to get the most out of the time there, because, it's quite unique having that time and space just to make stuff without any real kind of pressure,
commission behind it, or pressure.
Exactly. So then when I came out, when I finished sitting gills, very soon after leaving, I got quite a big commission for a library in North Wales, which was a classical figure to represent wisdom, and they wanted a dark coloured stone because of the colour of the stonework on the building. They didn't want anything too light that would draw the eye too much, and so I ended up doing it in Kilkenny, which Nina.
No, I knew you were going to say that.
and it was an absolute nightmare, because I love it
Kilkenny.
for lots of things, but for like large scale figurative work, it was just so it took me a long time, and I was very pleased with the results at the time, but so that was the first big thing, and I thought, well, this is how it's going to carry on. Big commissions, large scale work. Actually didn't happen like that. So once I moved back to the West Country, so that I could afford a studio. Really, there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons was being able to afford a studio that I could do large scale work, and use grinders. In London, that's unaffordable. For me at the time, it definitely was. So I completed that commission, and I was thinking, off the back of that, I hope lots of things might happen, but actually it didn't really. So for the next sort of maybe 5 or 6 years, I did a mixture of masonry work for different conservation companies, and some conservation work, subcontracting. I picked up a few kind of small carving jobs, quite a lot of lettering, and I also went to work for a guy called Jeffrey Preston. I don't know if you've met him, Nina.
He's very
He's really good, and he doesn't do stonework. He used to do stonework. He was a stonemason and carver, but he now does stucco modelled plaster work.
Extraordinary work.
Yeah. So I was trying to I had to keep money coming in, but I was trying to do as many different things that would feed into the the decorative architectural carving side of things, and whatever I could find that would some way help me with that or further my skills. And there were times where it was quite dispiriting. When I wasn't getting any carving work for long periods of time, but I was always trying to do something that would keep my eye in, keep my hand in. So that,
I think that period of when you leave your training and then setting up by yourself is almost one of the most difficult times to bridge, because you don't have the work, you don't have the reputation, and I think it's where a lot of people struggle. And there's the necessity to bring an income in, and studio space is expensive, increasingly more difficult for people to afford rent and studio space. So I think they are really difficult periods of time. So it's great to hear stories of success. I think people will be interested in how did you get the work in? How did you keep, what did you do to
And
keep
I think
going?
it's really interesting that you kind of casually said, oh, for 4 or 5 years I did this. I mean, people expect success overnight, don't they?
No, yeah.
And you kind of jump off the cliff, you leave the nest, so to speak, and you go into this, you're in a sheltered environment. If you do organized training, like institutional training. If you're an apprentice for someone, that's slightly different. I think you're eased into the realness of it. It becomes a daily thing. But when you jump off the cliff and you leave and you're no longer in that support system, very many people will go back to a previous employment to get money. Often you can get caught up in having a little bit more money and something that you know, and you start losing confidence in what you're able to do. I think the longer you don't do it, the less confident you become in what you physically can. And I often talk to people who didn't do it straight away, and it takes them another 10 years to get back into it. But I think I love the fact that you committed to moving somewhere. I can get a studio here. I know I can get work doing this. I am going to look for work. And it took you 4 or 5 years to do that. And I think that's amazing for, you know, that's why one of the brilliant reasons for you coming on here, because you're like, I work really hard. It's hard work.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, to get where I am today, it's not an overnight success. You can look and be a bit envious about my career today, but actually it's been bloody hard work to get here. And
no, I mean, I think that's right. And also, you know, I suppose I feel as well slightly that, you know, because I think often, like, well, you're right, what you're saying is often people are tempted, if they had a career before, they've changed to working in stone, and it becomes a bit difficult, and they go back to a previous career to make money. And whereas I think, well, I'm lucky in the sense that my previous career, albeit for a short period of time, was stonemasonry and conservation. So going back to that always fed into what I was doing, and also I was also picking up contacts while I was doing that, meeting architects, and you know, and from those conservation companies, starting off doing you know, not what I wanted to be doing necessarily, but then when telling them that I could carve and showing them the work that I did, if something came up, they would put work my way.
Put yourself out there.
Exactly. And that's the most important thing, is it's really hard to not feel like you're being pushy, or, you know, that it's a balance, and, you know, putting yourself out there without putting people off and seeming pushy. And it's, you know, my natural instinct is not to kind of put myself out there, but, you know, I've had to kind of learn to force myself to do that more, you know.
Sorry, I'm just bringing up the questions again. So let's talk about what you do now, because we're at that point. So you are a sculptor who works in stone. Okay, so I talk to a lot of people, and I'm like, how do you describe yourself? I struggle with the word sculptor. I try and use it more and more now. I'd always say architectural carver, because it gave me a bit of a warm blanket feeling that I was still connected to masonry and everything else. What do you call yourself, Tom?
Yeah, well, that again, I've got the same thing. So I think now I'm finally kind of comfortable with sculptor. I find artist difficult, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, that's, so it is a funny one how you call yourself, because I'm also still a stonemason. I'm still an architectural carver. You know, so I still do all those things. But if someone were to ask me, you know, I would say sculptor, and I would always say sculptor, and I work in stone. So the material is very important. Although I have started doing some things, public art, particularly different materials. But yeah, that's how I define myself, really. Sculptor in stone. And on my website there is a combination of traditional architectural carving, public art, and my contemporary work. And I've kind of for a while thought, should I just separate it all? But actually I've come to the conclusion that it's fine to, you know, to have that on show, that it shows the progression and how I got to where I am now.
So for those people who haven't found you or discovered you, I'm surprised if they haven't, but just because we're on a podcast, just let's talk about your sculptural work and your identity as a sculptor, and some of the really exciting things that you've done in the past and exciting things you're doing in the future. But talk to us about what's your style, Tom? So you carve stone, but in a classical style, but it's not classical, is it?
No, I mean, I suppose the sort of best way to describe it is hyperrealism, in a way, but that's usually a term that's applied to kind of painting, I guess. But it's so I'll just describe the first piece I did which was a cardboard box, and kind of the reason I came to do it was I was looking at Baroque drapery, and the way that it's very angular but also seems very soft, and it's got that combination of, and in a way it can look quite contemporary, and to me it's interesting how they managed to create fabric that looks soft but also very, very angular with quite hard edges. And I looked at a crumpled cardboard box that was in my studio, and it kind of just reminded me of that. The way that cardboard bends and crumples, looks very soft, but also has these sharp angles. So I, just as an exercise and for fun, really, I just decided to carve it with using a pointer machine to copy it quite accurately, in a piece of Portland stone. And because you can polish Portland, there are bits where the tape were sort of left on the cardboard box, which I polished and made it look like shiny sellotape. So that was the first thing, and then I made a couple of other things. I made a plastic cup in alabaster, which was twice life size. One of the cheap plastic cups with the rings around it, disposable cup. And then I put them in a little community show in around probably 2014, 2015. With it was it's called the 10 Parishes show, and it's just all the kind of villages have a little art festival. And I exhibited in my friend Jo Henry's studio. She's a painter. And it was the first time I'd ever, since Sitting Guilds, the first time I'd exhibited any work, and it was the first time I'd ever exhibited any work that was just my own work, that wasn't architectural, a copy of an architectural piece of carving. And I sold two out of the three pieces that I exhibited. And I think if that hadn't have happened, again, it's one of these little chance moments, and it's by people I didn't know as well. So I think if that hadn't happened, it wouldn't necessarily have led me to carry on. So initially it was more about the material as well. So it was more about transforming material in the way that you can with drapery. And remember, Nina, like the drapery projects that project at college was something that I really, when I went to look around the Sitting Guilds, it was something that really struck me, that seeing the people carving drapery and that sort of trompe-l'oeil effect where stone can look like fabric was, something that's all in the back of my mind. And then sculptures that I appreciate often have that kind of illusory effect where stone has been transformed into something else. So initially it was about the material, and then as my work's progressed, it's become a way to express concerns that I have about the world. So environmental issues, health inequalities. There's a series of works I do called Big Pharma, which are all oversized pharmaceuticals. And there's a piece that I've done about AI as well. But so it's all using hyperrealism and the sort of illusory trompe-l'oeil effect you can achieve with stone, using different types of stone to look like different materials. So I use ironstone to look like rusty metal. White marble is usually plastic or polystyrene. So it's the knowledge of materials and how they can look when they're carved is part of what drives the work as well.
And I think it's really interesting because we had a brief conversation about hyperrealism can be that, or it can be used with a background in monumental and classical sculpture, which I think is what you bring to the table, is that you're leaving out quite a lot of details and you're interpreting form with a classical eye.
Yeah.
And you give your work, regardless of scale, because I've seen your smaller works and online I've seen your bigger works, they have a kind of strange effect on the environment they're put in because of their scale, but also because of your carving techniques on them and the things that you leave out. So I think it's really interesting because people, you know, you might say, oh, it looks exactly like a polystyrene cup, or it looks exactly like the one I particularly like is is it a carving machine that you carved?
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
the
angled
AI
machine.
piece. Yeah, it's
the
called
AI.
I'm not a robot, and it's carving itself from a block of marble. So
Yeah,
it's sort of referencing Escher a little bit with the drawing hands, and
really
no, you're right.
interesting, but designed with a monumental mason's eye, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right.
You're in it. You're in every piece. I can see you in it.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thanks. That, you know, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's like you say. I mean, it's the decisions that you make when you're doing an architectural carving of where to undercut more, to trap more light, where you want the dark shadows, where you don't want dark shadows. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, so like you say, they're not exact copies, and I'm carving the first box actually because the gallery wanted me to carve another cardboard box. I hadn't carved one since 2018, and I do use a pointing machine when I'm doing one-to-one scale. But the beauty of carving something like a cardboard box rather than a face, or for instance, is you can abandon the pointing machine pretty quickly. So if people don't know, pointing machine is a way of referencing points using a frame and a pin with an articulated arm, and it's a very accurate way of making reproduction of a model. And if you're carving something that needs to be a complete accurate copy of your model because you need everything to be in the right place, like a face, for instance, and you know, you might go on a bit longer with the pointing machine to make sure. But with the cardboard box, you can really be a bit freer, and I use it really just to rough out what the basic form of it, and then the really fun bit is you know, scrutinizing the detail. And I do that mainly. Often I do that now without even drawing so much, and I do a bit, but I often am almost drawing with the chisel, because you know, you've just got a certain amount of freedom and there's a certain amount of interpretation, which gives it a bit more life anyway, you know.
Yeah. So you've through your work and your interests, and you know, you're referencing a lot of kind of, there is social commentary that you're really interested in. So do you choose the stone then specifically for color and texture, and where do you get your stone from? Do you access your stone locally, or you know, UK, or have you now got a kind of palette of stones that you like revisiting, or how do you make those choices?
Well, it's all different really. So yes, I'm always thinking what stones or types of marble I can use to make different things, which stones have qualities, be that color, texture of certain things. So initially so the first pieces I did were from stone that I had, because as a carver, as you know, you both know, you often end up with lumps of stone knocking around in the studio, because it might be offcuts or extra pieces, or what I used to do a lot is go and dig around in offcuts piles at different stone suppliers. Sometimes they give them to me for free. Sometimes I'd buy bits that were surplus to requirements. So that's how I started initially. So Wells Cathedral stonemasons have a good offcuts pile. I think you've mentioned them on this podcast before, and another one, Medusa Masonry in Somerton and Somerset, who have more marble. So the first marble pieces I did were from offcuts that I got from Medusa, and I still get marble from them, but now it's more it's more specific what I want. So recently I did a traffic cone, and that was made from black, white, and red marble. So I went to Medusa and saw that they had a red marble and a white marble I could use, and they bought black marble in for me to use for that. And then I bought from them. So often it's still that it's kind of marble that's surplus to requirements for them. So they had a huge block of grey Greek marble called Era Silver, which was perfect for a piece that I've just finished, which is a wheelie bin. So I bought, and in the end I just bought the whole block from them, and they cut what I needed for me for the wheelie bin, and I had two really big offcuts left, because it was, in a way, it was they preferred to, that they wanted to do it like that because they'd rather get me buy the whole bit from them rather than be left with offcuts. So I've had to think of, so in that instance I was looking at this grey marble thinking, what can I make from that? And I'm going to do a puffer jacket hung on a hook called Fast Fashion, and so that's one of the next pieces I'm going to do. Yeah, so it's a combination. Sometimes I'm looking at a material and thinking, what can I do with that? Sometimes I'm thinking, right, I want to make this. What material can I use?
Stone is actually very expensive for people who don't know.
No, it is.
I'm always, whenever people come and talk about commissions at my workshop, and we discuss the different stones, they're quite often shocked at how much a piece of stone can be,
and how varied it is as well. So particularly for lettering, I mean, varied. For a bit of Welsh slate, their prices can be eye-watering, can't they? And the lead times can be pretty bad often as well. So it's often people don't understand that if they want a particular stone, sometimes they might have to wait 6 to 8 weeks for it to be produced, depending on which quarry it's from.
6 to 8 weeks is nothing. I've waited 12 months for some. From a couple of years ago, I think Burlington had a very long wait time. I think it's much better
slate
now.
Can be bad, can't it?
Yeah,
I don't know why, but it's
Can I ask you about the transition from limestone to marble, Tom? So, you bought some. So I imagine you bought some marble and thought, you know what, I haven't used this much. I'm going to have a go at it. What physically and technically, what was the main was it a big learning curve to go into it? Did you find it easier? Did you fall in love with it instantly?
Well, the first experience of carving any marble was another one of the things that I did to try and, because that period when I was kind of scratching around for work, I went and worked for a short time with a guy called Paul Spencer, who does marble fireplaces. So I carved a few little roundels for him in white marble. So I kind of got a feel for it, and it is a bit of a transition. Mainly, as you probably know, Nina, is the finishing. Just takes a long time, much longer than you expect, and the way that you carve it, you have to be a bit more cautious. You can't really strike it too hard, or you can bruise it, and then you get these little white marks which look like where you haven't polished or finished it properly. But you can keep polishing and sanding it, and the mark stays because it's a kind of fracture that's gone deep into the stone. So the first few times you do that, it's quite frustrating, and it kind of, you end up having to be more cautious. And I've actually ended up doing a lot more of the early stages of the carving with marble, with grinders and die grinders, because you don't get that problem. And it's not as nice a way of working, but as long as you switch to hand tools at the right time, it saves a lot of time, and it saves extra work and finishing. I don't know if you find that with marble.
Yeah, I mean, because when we teach, we basically say don't use marble when you're learning, because it takes so long. When you're learning to carve, you want to make as many carvings as humanly possible in the shortest period of time, so you get that experience. And with marble, I always find, suddenly it's all about electrical cutting equipment, I think, to get to the fun bit, like you say. And also a third of the project is finishing, I think. I don't think it's unfair to say a third of the time, whereas any other kind of limestone, maybe it's 10% it's finishing, 20% is finishing, but I would say, a third of. And I know that you can do
endurance test a little bit, isn't it?
It is. It is. Fingerprints disappear, don't they? Basically, it's just, you could be a really good burglar after you finished. I'm sure most of the nobody has fingerprints.
The corners of the fingernails, which just get
just
worn
wear
away. It's like painful.
I know.
I don't think there's many stone carvers that fingerprints work on their phone.
No,
none of us can do fingerprint recognition.
No,
exactly. Sometimes even my face recognition is like, no.
Too much stuff.
You look too tired. You don't can possibly be the person who bought this phone. So if we talk about commissioning, so you started doing your own work. You started to get a little bit successful. You're exhibiting. Brilliant that you started in such a kind of localized way, and then that starts to build. So what was the pivot point commission for you that you think took you into the next level of thinking, do you know what, I'm going to do this?
Well, I mean, it's been so gradual, to be honest, since those, these little kind of things that happen that don't seem huge at the time, but when you look back on, it's always the kind of little things, like a couple of people buying work at that small exhibition I did. But then, so after that, the next thing that happened that was a big deal really was there was a art prize called the Rise Art Prize in London, and I applied for that, and I got through to the shortlist and was in the exhibition there, and I won 2 categories of that. So that that really kind of spurred me on to keep going and keep making. And then not necessarily off the back of that, but kind of off the back of that, because I started producing more work then, because I thought, well, it seems like now's the time to really give it a go. I found out about OnForm, which you probably know about. Both of you, do you know OnForm? Which sadly I think it's either having a long pause or it's not going to happen again, unfortunately. But in 2018, I applied to be in that group show, and Peter Randall Page, who you've interviewed, also exhibits there every year, and I had worked for him just the year before I left college on his big project, the Eden Project. So I suddenly felt like I was I was exhibiting in the same exhibition as Peter, and met lots of other, and OnForm is an exhibition that was every other year at Astle Manor, and it was solely stone sculpture, and so everyone that exhibited there was working in stone, and I sold a few pieces there, and met so many sort of great people, and suddenly having felt like kind of quite isolated with my own work. I suddenly felt part of a kind of bigger community of people, so I suppose that those two things, winning 2 categories in the Rise Art Prize and then exhibiting it OnForm, were the 2 things that really sort of made me feel that it could be something sustainable, rather than but it's still I kind of I dip back into doing masonry and architectural carving work. So and I actually like that. I think that it still feeds into my work, and I also think that not to be relying entirely on my fine art for income is a good thing, because it takes a lot of stress away from it. I can make work I want to make more without having to think, like, well, this has to sell, otherwise, so I can make work that maybe not quite as commercial, which I think is a trap that for sculpture, it's a trap to fall into, making work that you think, making it because you think it's going to sell, rather than making it because it's what you really want to be making.
Yeah. And recently, sorry, Charlotte, go on.
No, go on. I think I'll ask after you.
If you tell it, so recently you are now represented by a gallery, a very famous gallery. So talk us through that, Tom, because that's a brilliant achievement.
Yeah, no, that is, and so that came about really because I was approached by a curator last year, no, the year before last, actually. Sorry, yeah. So 2022, to to be included in a group show at their Wiltshire gallery, Messens. Wiltshire, they've got a gallery in Wiltshire, which is well, there's two galleries, and the main gallery is a converted medieval tithe barn, and it's quite a spectacular building. It's huge, and there was she was curating an exhibition at Messens called Tideline about really about climate change and how the oceans are being affected by climate change. So she approached me. I mean, partly because there's a series of works that I do called Anthropocene Fossils. And the first one of those that I made, near me, there's a beach, watch it, where the cliffs have these alabaster seams in the cliffs. So I'm going off on a bit of a tangent now, but it's not a tangent really. But so there's these, you can find pebbles on the beach or rocks that have alabaster seams within them, and they will just eventually dissolve. So you can kind of not feel too guilty about taking them, because alabaster will dissolve in water, and particularly in salt water. So I collected a few of these rocks and pebbles that had alabaster seams running through them, and one of them I carved a coffee lid from this alabaster seam, which was kind of perfectly placed to look like the coffee lid was a fossil within this kind of greeny grey rock. Anyway, so that was the first, and I've done 4 of that series of works now, and I think it was that piece that the curator saw that she wanted in this show. So I showed that piece and a couple of other pieces with lots of other artists that's work also sort of addressed concerns about climate change. And then from that, I sold a few pieces at that exhibition, and the Johnny invited me to exhibit in their London gallery following year. So last year I had a solo show at their Cork Street gallery, and that also went really well. And then from there, they invited me to be represented, which has been brilliant. Really, it's been
such good news to hear. You know, somebody coming through a stone route like yours and getting this, you know, great opportunities.
And
you know, must feel really
no,
good.
I love the fact that you just so casually went, and then I had a solo show in Cork Street. I mean, it's like, Tom, you had a solo show in Cork Street, man.
I know, no, it is brilliant. I mean, it's
that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is. I mean, I never,
and it went quite well.
It went quite well, Tom, apparently.
And
I sold a few things.
I know, but I mean, when I was making those first pieces, I wouldn't have ever dreamed of having ended up here. So I do feel very lucky to be able to keep making the work, and to have that. You know, it's a lot of it is people giving me the confidence to continue. You know, so all these things, selling the work at the first show, winning the art prize, and then Johnny putting his faith in me at Messens as well. You know, they're just basically you need people to tell you to carry on. Basically, that's what I've found. It's you know that's what's been brilliant about Messens. And then I've got a solo show coming up next year in their big barn space, the Messens Wiltshire, which for that doing much larger work than I've done in the past, which is quite nerve-wracking. So I've got 2 ironstone blocks, one's 9 tons and one's 4 tons, which I really struggled to get delivered to the workshop because of access issues, but they're here now, and one is going to be a cubed up car, you know, like the scrapyard when they crush them into cubes. And I bought an actual cubed up car from the scrapyard. It's just about fitted in the back of my van. So quite funny having a crushed up Ford Fiesta in the back of my Transit. Yeah. And then the other one's going to be a full-size car, but slightly crushed, as if it's kind of been partially crushed by the scrapyard's crushing machine. And that's going to be more difficult to work out how to do. And I'm going on a 3D scanning course. My plan is to 3D scan, which we've talked about because you've used that a lot, Nina, and 3D scan a crushed car and then I can maybe adapt it a bit, you know, once I've got that representation from the 3D print.
Is technology that you use something a lot, or is it new to
No,
you?
not really.
Or...
It's completely new. I mean, the only thing I do is sometimes a bit of making short videos of the process of working and stuff. But as far as that sort of technology goes, no, it's good at first for me. I'm looking forward to it.
I think it's fabulous when a maker, it's a tool, isn't it? And if it makes your life a little bit easier and can make processes more straightforward for you, that's what it's built for.
Yeah.
You know, all of the flashy, all singing, all dancing stuff we see every day on our phones is great.
Yeah.
But it's actually the daily use and the processes, and the more available they become to people who work on their own, the better, I think. That
and combined with an incredible skill base and historical understanding of making in your medium, you know, that really has come across very strongly to me. You know, it's so interesting to hear that, the necessity of having that skill base, the historical background to your work. A lot of people don't really understand how important those two things are. And then when you combine it with changes and advancements in technology, you know, it becomes a much more powerful way of maximizing the benefits of the different ways of working that are open to
No,
us
exactly. And it's all, as long as it isn't overused, they're all just tools, you know. I mean, you know, I've met, because there can be a sort of tendency, particularly with working as stone, kind of resistance to anything technological because it's seen as somehow cheating. Or I've come across sculptors who have been even really quite resistant to using grinders, you know, because they maybe see that as cheating, you know, and then change to start using them and realize that actually it's just another tool, and all these things are just another tool, and if they're overused it can kind of not have the best results.
If you you know, you're 20 odd years in now to your career, if not a bit more, and you are where you are, you've had your Cork Street Gallery, you've got a one-man show, you're now able to make works of a monumental scale. You know, your ambition is to produce these monumental, you're on an upward trajectory. If someone wanted to pursue a career in, let's just say, fine art carving or carving as such, I mean, there are 3 or 4 different jobs that you do regularly, but if they wanted to build a career that, you know, is on a similar trajectory to yours, if you had to give some advice to somebody, what either would you have wished to have been told, or would you tell someone?
Well, I suppose the first thing, and something that I've found extremely useful throughout my career, is masonry training, because you might never actually work as a stonemason, but what that gave me, I think, is confidence with stone, and not being afraid of removing big bits, you know, because people can be kind of overcautious and not want to take the biggest amount off first, you know, and you end up, I can't remember who it was at college, talk about peeling the onion, and you can waste so much time carving something and it's in the wrong place. It's too high and you need to keep going back, and you kind of effectively can end up roughing out and then re-roughing out and then re-roughing out a form, rather than taking the biggest checks that you possibly can off first. And that's something that masonry teaches you, and it's all about efficiently removing stone in the right order. You know, a lot of what I do is not like masonry at all, but in fact a lot of what I do is. So the wheelie bin that I just carved is almost pure masonry, really. The coffee cup that I did is a combination of masonry and almost drapery. So the round lid of the coffee cup, the way that I approach that is exactly how a stonemason would approach it. And then the cardboard of the coffee cup, which looks like crumpled drapery, I carved that as a sculptor would. So just the more skills you can acquire, the more varied the work that you can create is. That's what I feel. And also the other bit of advice would be, work with as many different people as you possibly can that are more experienced than you, and try and learn as much as you can from other people. The period of time where I wasn't picking up much of my own work, I was working with lots of other people, Jeff Preston, who I talked about, Paul Spencer, who does the fireplaces, and those things which were done through necessity were actually extremely helpful to me. That's the advice I'd give.
Do you have anybody working for you or helping you with any of your projects, or do you do it all yourself?
I share my workshop with a stonemason called Gavin Young, who helps me with. We work on jobs together where there's carving element and a masonry element. So good examples that we did together was a Baroque bridge, which was one side. It's a Baroque folly bridge, which is actually a dam on a big lake, but it looks like a bridge. And so it had two curved coping stones on both sides and a caryatid type figure on each side. And one of each side was missing, so that all the copings with these kind of, it was almost like underwater scene, shells and rocks, pearls, and that was completely missing. So I had to design something based on what was on the other side, but different because it's a kind of asymmetric thing. So he did all the masonry work, the coping stones, some balustrades, and I did the carving, and it works perfectly because he hasn't really got an interest in carving, and I quite happy for him to do the masonry. So when we get jobs like that, which come around less and less, so interestingly, just that job, that was 2018, and that's the year that I was in the Rise Art Prize, and on the back of that bridge, so there's all these rocks and shells and foliage. Round the back on the new part that I carved, I just carved wedged between two rocks, crushed Coke can as a little kind of secret signature. And it was the only time I've ever had the opportunity to do something like that. I thought the client would be sympathetic to it. There was somewhere I could carve it which was slightly hidden. It was a completely new bit of carving, so I wasn't doing anything that was in any way compromising any historic carving. And so I carved it, and then I left it for a couple of months, and then I came clean to the client and said, if you don't like it, I can just carve it out. It would have been really easy to just take that bit of carving out of the crevice, but cut to just carve it away. He said, since I didn't notice it, that's on me, and you got away with it, so that's still there.
It's like monumental graffiti.
They'd have loved
it.
Exactly.
I mean, like on a medieval cathedral, you often see secret little carvings that the masons have done, sort of little messages, and so it's in that tradition, really, and it was quite a nice thing to.
It's so lovely to see you after all these years, and
you too,
obviously
Nina.
Been following your career, and it's
likewise.
Just so wonderful to see. I'm always like, I know Tom Waugh. When people are like, I really like this work, I'm like, I know him. So it's wonderful, and thank you for taking time out of your busy morning.
Well, and no, thank you so much, and no, I love the podcast as well. So it's been a pleasure coming on and listening to all the other guests you've had on. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant for a stone nerd to listen to, and also for people that might want to get want a kind of more detail than you normally get about what it's like to work with stone. It's brilliant.
Thank you from us, Tom. It's been brilliant, and thank you so much for being so open and talking us through. And we're going to really look forward to seeing we'll all make the effort and come and see your one-man show.
Yeah, definitely.
Really looking forward to seeing these 9-ton cars. Really looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
And the progress online.
Wait. They're staring at me.
And the puffer jacket.
From outside the workshop at the moment.
Well, much love to you, Tom. And
very nice to meet you.
Take care of yourself.
And, thank you.
Well, that was brilliant, wasn't it? He's such a lovely man with really interesting background and skill set. He's got a really broad skill set.
I think it's really easy to undermine the level of skill if you're not a carver, or you've done a little bit of carving required to make those hyper-realistic images in stone. And I thought it was interesting hearing him talk about how you do have to make subtle changes for the stone to look like it's doing the same thing. It shows a great sensitivity to material as well as form, and an really in-depth understanding of process and what he's doing. Super skilled.
And it clearly shows a background knowledge in classical carving.
Yes.
Although it is a contemporary practice, and he admits he is a contemporary sculptor primarily, but it obviously shows the kind of skills that the Egyptians or the Assyrians would be having, interestingly, for like monolithic works. I think they have there's an interesting kind of ambiguity about scale when you look at his work, dependent on whether it's photographed indoors or outdoors. A little bit like, he worked with Peter Randall Page for a bit, didn't he? And I think he has a similar interesting, it could be tiny or it could be monolithic, and that's about leaving detail out on certain scale and concentrating on certain other details and stylistic nuances of large carvings. So I love the information that he gave us about all the different stones that he was using too. So really, really enjoyed it. Lovely conversation.
Yeah, great to talk to him. So we're coming to the close of this episode, but before we do, a reminder that we are running our carving course in Bradmore Woods in Norfolk from the 2nd to the 5th of September. Website details will be up soon. We're still just finalising a few of those details, but it's an absolutely fabulous on-site experience. So we'll put the details of that up on our website, abraxasacademy.co.uk soon. And finally, before we go, Nina has a top tip for an exhibition she'd like to recommend to anybody in the UK or near to London.
Last week I had a brilliant couple of days zooming around London, managing to catch up on some exhibitions. I went to see the DIVA exhibition at the V&A, which I can highly recommend if you like a frock and pop music. Brilliant. Just a bubble of happiness in the middle of the sometimes very serious V&A. Some extraordinary tailoring and frock making, which is something I'm looking at the moment for my MA. So anyway, on a side note, go to the DIVA, you'll love it. Oh, and go to the Riotous Women at Tate Britain, I think it was. Absolutely fabulous if you've got any interest in women behaving badly. But the one I'd like to highlight the most is the Frank Auerbach exhibition at the Courtauld. It runs from February the 9th to the 27th of May. It's 10 charcoal head drawings that he did in the 50s, I believe they were. And Frank Auerbach was a big inspiration to me when I started drawing as a young adult. And you will remember them, I think, if you've seen them, by the fact that each drawing can take months and sometimes years. And he has a sitter, perhaps for 3 years sometimes, the same sitter, and he basically draws them, rubs it out, draws them, rubs them out, draws them, and he works through the page. So that sometimes the page has been patched many, many times, and they've got such an extraordinary sculptural quality to them. They are otherworldly. So a very emotional, kind of deep surfaces, sculptural surfaces, with an amazing, if anybody out there draws in charcoal will understand how difficult it is to be subtle and to have clean understanding of form, how kind of, the restraint it takes to draw in charcoal in that quality. But also there are bold and aggressive lines all over the page. But, I put my reading glasses on, I got really close to them. And once you look past the bold mark making and look behind the structure and the beautiful representation of the human face behind the kind of energy in the front lines, can't recommend it enough. That's Frank Auerbach. He's still alive, and he's in his 90s. And if you're interested in a really interesting interview with him, the podcast This Cultural Life on BBC Sounds interviews him about that exhibition, and I would strongly recommend that too. It gives you a really interesting insight into his life, and obviously it's all linked to the Second World War, and he was brought here at age 8, I believe, to escape the Nazis. So go and see it. Absolutely extraordinary. And I will guarantee, if you're a stone carver, his mark making will find its way onto the surface of the stone.
Great. So all that's left to say is happy chipping.
Happy chipping.